It's begun. These 10 Asian countries will collapse soon. Asia dazzles the world with its innovation, culture, and rapid development. But behind the impressive skylines and booming economies, a quiet storm is brewing. Hidden beneath the growth are 10 nations standing on a dangerous edge, struggling with rising debt, broken political systems, and growing unrest that could shake the region to its core. From economic bubbles ready to burst to leadership losing control, the collapse isn't coming, it has already begun. The question is, which countries are closest to falling, and why? Stay with us as the journey of wisdom unpacks the 10 Asian nations on the brink of collapse and what their stories can teach us about impermanence, leadership, and the fragile balance of progress. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more thought-provoking insights. Now, let's dive in. Number 1. Yemen. Yemen stands at the very edge of collapse, not as a warning of what might come, but as a heartbreaking example of a nation already enduring one of the worst humanitarian disasters of our time. After nearly a decade of relentless war, Yemen has become a land where hope is fading and survival is a daily battle. More than 17 million people, men, women, and children, are gripped by extreme hunger, and as international aid shrinks, the shadow of famine stretches wider each day. What's most devastating is not just the empty shelves or dry wells, but the silence that often surrounds their suffering. In Buddhist wisdom, there is a saying, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." It reminds us that even in the darkest places, compassion is a powerful force. Yet in Yemen, compassion must travel far to reach those who need it most. Their currency has collapsed into dust, public workers go unpaid, and banks no longer function, leaving people to rely on unstable black markets just to afford bread. The idea of a peaceful morning or a secure future is something many Yemenis haven't experienced in years. The brutal conflict between the Saudi-backed government and the Houthi rebels keeps the country in constant turmoil, with airstrikes and drone attacks turning homes and hospitals into rubble. Civilians live in a constant state of fear, with no protection, no peace, and no clear end in sight. And still, in the midst of this suffering, people carry on. Parents still try to care for their children. Communities still cling to dignity, even as their country disintegrates around them. To understand Yemen's collapse is not to merely list statistics, but to feel the weight of a human tragedy that the world too often turns away from. In our modern lives, we scroll past headlines and news alerts, desensitized by repetition. But this is where we must pause. As men who are learning, growing, and leading, fathers, brothers, friends, there is a responsibility to not turn away from suffering, even if it's oceans away. The Buddha taught, if you light a lamp for someone else, it will also brighten your path. By educating ourselves, by refusing to be indifferent, we offer not just awareness but the seeds of action. Yemen may feel distant, but it teaches us something close to home, the importance of peace, stability, and empathy in our own lives. If we ignore the suffering of others, we risk allowing similar instability to take root in our communities and within ourselves. The collapse of a country like Yemen isn't just about political failure, it's about the erosion of values, the neglect of compassion, and the cost of forgetting that we are all connected. Let this be a reminder. While we may not be able to stop every war or feed every hungry child, we can commit to being more conscious, more informed, and more human in how we walk through this world. And in doing so, we begin to create the kind of strength that does not collapse. Number 2. Syria. Let's take a moment to reflect on what's really happening in Syria. Not just headlines or statistics, but the real human suffering that's been going on for more than a decade. You may have heard about Syria's long civil war, but in 2025, things aren't just bad, they're dangerously close to a complete collapse. Years of relentless conflict have not only destroyed buildings and cities, but have also broken the very fabric of society. The economy has crumbled to its knees. The Syrian pound has lost nearly all its value, and prices have skyrocketed so much that even basic necessities like bread, rice, or medicine are becoming luxuries. What would you do if feeding your family became a daily struggle? That's the heartbreaking reality for millions of Syrians right now. More than 70% of the population is dependent on international aid just to survive, according to the United Nations. That's not just a statistic. That's families, children, elders, all waiting in line day after day, hoping for enough food to last the night. Even though the loudest battles may have quieted down, Syria is still far from peace. Violence continues to burn in the background like a slow, dangerous fire. Rebel groups, terrorist organizations, and foreign armies all have a hand in the chaos. Bombings and kidnappings have become part of daily life in many areas. And while people struggle to live with dignity, foreign sanctions are making things even harder. These sanctions, though intended to pressure leaders, have had a crushing effect on ordinary people, suffocating the economy and blocking efforts to rebuild. Roads remain broken, hospitals can't get the supplies they need, and power outages stretch for hours or even days. And amid all of this, corruption continues to rot the core of government. Those in power live comfortably while the rest of the population is pushed deeper into poverty. So, when we say Syria is a failed state, it's not an exaggeration, it's a cry for help. It's a country frozen in pain, with no clear path to recovery unless real, meaningful, and compassionate diplomacy takes place. But let's pause here and ask, what truly makes a country collapse? Is it only war and politics? Or is it also when hope disappears? When people stop believing things can change? Syria's story is not just about destruction, it's also about resilience. In the face of so much loss, countless Syrians still rise each day, care for one another, and try to hold on to hope. So how can the world respond to that? And how can we, as global citizens, reflect on our own roles in a world where so much suffering exists, yet often goes unseen? The lesson here is powerful. When compassion is absent from leadership and greed overshadows humanity, collapse becomes inevitable, not just physically, but spiritually. But where empathy exists, healing can begin. Syria teaches us that survival is not enough. People need dignity, peace, and a future they can believe in. The next time we hear about global conflict, let's not turn away. Ask yourself, what can we do to make the world just a little more kind, a little more aware, and a little more united? Because no one deserves to be forgotten in the rubble. Number 3. Lebanon. Let's talk about a country that's been facing incredible hardship, Lebanon. And as we step into 2025, it's important to ask ourselves, how does a nation go from being called the Paris of the Middle East to a place where daily life has become almost impossible. Lebanon is a powerful reminder of how quickly things can unravel when political corruption, economic instability, and failing infrastructure collide all at once. Right now, many experts and observers are sounding the alarm. Lebanon is not just in trouble, it's dangerously close to complete collapse. So what's really happening there, and why should you care? To begin with, let's talk about money, because for most Lebanese people, it no longer feels like they have any. The Lebanese pound has lost more than 95% of its value since 2019. Just imagine what that does to your savings. People who worked hard for years, saving every penny, woke up one day to find their money practically worthless. On top of that, banks froze their accounts, which meant even those who had something saved couldn't get to it without accepting massive losses. Wouldn't you feel helpless if your own bank refused to give you your money? Many families now depend on help from relatives living abroad just to afford food and basic needs. That's become a lifeline for survival. And it doesn't stop there. Lebanon's essential services are breaking down. Electricity is available for only a few hours each day, and hospitals are running low on critical medicine. Water, the most basic human need, is becoming contaminated. Could you imagine raising a family in a place where clean water is a luxury and lights go out before dinner? Grocery prices have skyrocketed, with even staple foods now costing 4 times what they used to. Every trip to the market becomes a source of stress as families try to make impossible choices between medicine, food, or school supplies for their children. All of this is happening in the shadow of a government that appears frozen, paralyzed by corruption and political gridlock. Instead of stepping up to guide the country through crisis, Lebanon's leaders are locked in power struggles, unable or unwilling to take action. There are no major reforms, no meaningful steps to attract international aid, just a growing silence from those in charge, while the people suffer in plain sight. So here's a question. What happens when people lose faith in every institution meant to protect them? Unsurprisingly, protests have erupted once again as citizens demand accountability and an end to the decades of mismanagement that brought them here. They are not just protesting for better wages, they're protesting for the right to live with dignity. The truth is, if something doesn't change soon, something big and urgent, Lebanon could face a total state collapse. And that's not just bad news for Lebanon. It could unleash one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the region, creating ripple effects that impact nearby countries, migration patterns, and even global stability. But instead of turning away from this story, maybe the real question we should be asking is, what can we learn from Lebanon? What does it teach us about the importance of good governance, financial responsibility, and caring for our communities before things reach a breaking point? This isn't just a story about economics or politics, it's a story about people. Mothers trying to feed their children, doctors working without medicine, students whose future feels uncertain. And as we reflect on Lebanon's situation, let's not see it as something distant or disconnected from us. Let's see it as a call to pay attention, to care, and to ask, how can we, in our own way, contribute to a world where nations don't have to collapse before we notice they were struggling? If you've watched this far, you're clearly someone who wants to stay ahead of the curve in a rapidly changing world. Comment below with eyes wide open to show you're staying informed and prepared. Don't miss what's coming next. We're revealing the key signs and hidden truths that could shape the future of Asia. Stick around till the end to get the full picture and protect yourself from the unexpected. Number 4. Bangladesh. Bangladesh, once hailed as an emerging economic force in South Asia, now finds itself on the brink of collapse in 2025, facing a crisis deeper than any it has known in decades. The nation is grappling with an overwhelming storm of economic, political, and social distress that threatens the stability of daily life for its more than 170 million citizens. Inflation has spiraled out of control, with essential food items like rice and cooking oil witnessing a price surge of over 40% in a single year, pushing even the basics of survival out of reach for many families. What was once a staple diet is now a daily struggle. Fuel prices are choking transportation and energy supply, and in rural areas, hunger is becoming more visible, more painful, and more widespread. In such conditions, people aren't just suffering, they are being slowly pushed to the edge of despair. But the economic pain is just the surface. Underneath lies a crumbling financial foundation. Bangladesh owes billions of dollars to foreign lenders, and its reserves are vanishing faster than aid can be negotiated. The looming threat of default is not a distant possibility. It's a ticking clock. Without urgent international assistance or a radical policy shift, a full-scale financial meltdown could arrive within months, devastating the economy further and triggering a chain reaction of institutional failure. Meanwhile, political instability fans the flames. Protests erupt with increasing frequency, turning violent as tensions between opposition forces and government authorities intensify. The streets are restless. The people are exhausted. In a country still haunted by memories of past military interventions, whispers of another coup are growing louder, especially as governance seems increasingly fragile. Despite the bleak outlook, Bangladesh's manufacturing and garment industries remain a rare source of income and employment, generating billions in export revenue. Yet even these pillars are under pressure, with global demand fluctuating and supply chains being disrupted by local unrest. It's not just about economics anymore. It's about survival in a nation whose social contract is being tested every day. If inflation is not brought under control, if political reforms are not introduced swiftly, and if trust in the nation's future continues to erode, then what awaits Bangladesh is not merely a recession, but one of the most significant collapses in modern South Asian history. To the audience, especially those between 30 and 65, the working backbone of any nation, this unfolding situation offers lessons beyond headlines. It is a reminder that stability is fragile, that poor leadership and unchecked borrowing can undo years of progress. Whether you live in Bangladesh or abroad, whether your country seems stable or not, the wisdom here is universal. Manage your finances wisely, diversify your sources of income, stay informed about the decisions of those in power, and don't take political peace for granted. As Stoic philosophy often reminds us, external chaos cannot shake the truly prepared mind. Focus on what you can control, your actions, your values, and your readiness, and you will find clarity, even in uncertain times. Let the story of Bangladesh be not just a warning, but a wake-up call. Number 5. Afghanistan. Let's talk about Afghanistan. Number 5 on the list, but arguably one of the most heartbreaking cases in the modern world. You've likely heard the name in headlines, but behind those headlines is a real human tragedy that continues to deepen in 2025. Once held together by foreign aid and limited peace efforts, the country is now unraveling at an alarming pace under Taliban rule. Since their takeover in 2021, the international community has largely withdrawn support, and the consequences have been devastating. Imagine living in a place where more than 90% of the people are trapped below the poverty line, where finding food or clean water isn't a daily challenge, it's a desperate struggle for survival. That's the grim reality facing millions of Afghans today. So what went wrong? It's not just a story of war, it's a collapse of systems, economic, social and moral. With foreign aid gone, sanctions mounting and diplomatic ties severed, Afghanistan's financial lifelines have been cut. The banks, dysfunctional. The currency, practically worthless. Basic necessities like bread, rice and medicine have become luxury items, unreachable for the average family. Can you imagine watching your child waste away because even a piece of bread is too expensive? For countless families, that's not imagination, it's daily life. And where desperation rises, so do the shadows. Black market dealings, child labor, and even organ trafficking have become ways to survive. It's horrific, but when a society is pushed into the corners of hopelessness, the lines of morality blur. Do we blame the people, or do we question the circumstances that gave them no other choice? Violence hasn't disappeared either, it has morphed. Armed resistance, particularly from groups like ISIS-K, has turned the country into a battlefield once again. Bombings, raids, and civilian casualties keep the population living in fear. Peace isn't just out of reach, it's been forgotten. But the psychological toll is just as severe as the physical. Public executions, oppressive laws, and the constant threat of punishment have triggered a mass exodus. People are fleeing, not for a better life, but just to survive. Imagine risking your life and leaving your homeland, not for dreams, but because staying is a death sentence. How would you decide between staying with your loved ones and running toward a sliver of safety? What's left of Afghanistan's formal economy is in ruins. There's no viable trade, no healthy infrastructure, no way for families to rebuild. Experts now warn that unless something changes, and fast, the country could slip fully into anarchy. No rule of law, no governance, no hope. So here's a question for you. When a nation is cut off from the world, when its people are left to starve, and when the strongest voices stay silent, are we merely watching history, or are we allowing it? The collapse of Afghanistan isn't just a story about one country. It's a reflection of what happens when fear replaces leadership, when ideology overrides compassion, and when the world turns away from suffering. The lesson here is stark. Neglect breeds chaos, and silence enables suffering. As global citizens, we must recognize that collapse doesn't just happen, it is allowed. And in knowing that, we are also reminded of our power to speak, to act, and to care. If we don't, who will? Number 6. Laos. Let's talk about Laos, because even though you might not hear its name in the headlines every day, what's happening there is something we all need to pay attention to. Imagine a country with incredible natural beauty, rich cultural traditions, and a growing tourism industry that once held so much promise. Now, imagine that same country struggling under the weight of debt, rising prices, and a shrinking economy. That's the reality for Laos right now, and the situation is getting more serious by the day. Have you ever wondered what happens when a country borrows too much money without a strong plan to pay it back? That's exactly what Laos is facing. The country owes over $14 billion to China, mostly due to loans used to fund massive infrastructure projects. like the ambitious China-Laos high-speed railway. While these kinds of developments can boost growth in the long run, they can also become a heavy burden when the economy slows down, especially if the projects don't generate immediate returns. Now, let's break this down even further so you can truly feel what people in Laos are experiencing. Inflation has skyrocketed. Prices for basic necessities like food, fuel, and household goods have jumped by more than 35% in just the past year. Imagine walking into a grocery store and seeing the cost of your everyday groceries double, or worse, knowing you have to make a choice between putting fuel in your car or putting dinner on the table. That's the harsh reality for many Laotian families today. At the same time, the local currency, the kip, has lost over half its value since 2022. This means that even when people do have money, it buys them less and less each day. Have you ever faced a time when your paycheck just didn't go as far as it used to? That's exactly what's happening, only on a much larger and more painful scale. Jobs are scarce, wages have remained flat, and for many, there's no clear path forward. Tourism, once a key pillar of the Laotian economy, has not recovered from the pandemic. Countless businesses that depended on international visitors have shut their doors permanently, and the few that remain are barely hanging on. Without that steady flow of tourism revenue, Laos is struggling to find other industries to keep its economy alive. This makes the country more reliant than ever on foreign aid and assistance. But what happens if that aid slows down or comes with conditions that the country can't meet? As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what does it really mean for a nation to face collapse? Is it just about numbers and financial reports? Or is it also about the human cost? The families struggling to eat, the young people leaving their homeland in search of opportunity, the loss of hope for a better tomorrow. Laos is at a critical crossroads, and unless meaningful changes are made, like restructuring debt, creating jobs, and finding new sources of revenue, experts fear a full-scale economic breakdown could be just around the corner. So what would you do if you were in charge of guiding a country out of this kind of crisis? How would you balance growth, stability, and the well-being of your people? These are the kinds of questions we all need to think about, not just for Laos, but for any nation walking the fragile line between hope and hardship. If you're still here, you value knowledge and truth in a time of uncertainty. Comment "Prepared Mind" to join others who think critically about global changes. Don't click away. There's more coming that will help you understand the deeper forces behind these unfolding events. Number 7. North Korea. North Korea, long known for its closed-off and secretive regime, is now facing a reality more fragile than ever before, one that teeters dangerously on the edge of collapse. Despite the nation's reputation for resilience and self-reliance, the weight of decades of isolation, harsh international sanctions, and internal mismanagement has created a humanitarian and economic disaster that can no longer be ignored. At the heart of this crisis is a devastating food shortage that continues to deepen. According to the United Nations, over 40% of North Koreans are now malnourished, a figure that echoes the haunting memories of the 1990s famine that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Unlike back then, today's North Korea is even more cut off from the outside world. Strict border controls, especially following the COVID-19 pandemic, have made the delivery of foreign aid nearly impossible. This means that not only are food imports blocked, but the already limited internal production is nowhere near enough to sustain the population. And while the common people are left to fend for themselves, Often relying on dangerous and illegal black market trade just to survive, the government continues to pour its limited resources into weapons programs and military expansion, a tragic reflection of priorities deeply out of touch with human need. The economic foundation of the country has almost completely eroded. State-controlled industries barely function, trade is minimal, and inflation continues to rise. In a nation where the official economy is failing, the informal black market has become the primary lifeline for survival. This has created a dangerous imbalance where only those with access to underground networks can obtain food or medicine, deepening inequality and social unrest. Meanwhile, even those within the ruling class are beginning to show signs of discontent. Though Kim Jong-un maintains tight control over the state, recent reports of internal purges, rising defections, and dissatisfaction among elite circles suggest that the foundations of the regime are cracking. The fear that once held the system together is slowly being replaced by uncertainty and desperation. And in such an environment, even the most powerful dictatorships can become vulnerable to sudden change. In today's interconnected world, the collapse of a nation like North Korea would not just be a regional concern. It would ripple across borders, affecting geopolitical stability, humanitarian efforts, and global security. For us living in relative comfort, the story of North Korea serves as a sobering reminder of the cost of unchecked power, isolation, and misplaced priorities. It also reminds us how deeply human suffering can be hidden behind walls of propaganda and control. As we watch from afar, it's important to reflect on what it means to care for one another, not just within our own communities, but beyond them. Compassion, awareness, and wise leadership are not luxuries. They are necessities for survival, both for individuals and nations. In our own lives, let this be a lesson. When we prioritize power over people or pride over progress, we may win short-term battles, but lose the soul of our society. In the end, it is not strength that sustains a nation. It is empathy, fairness, and the courage to face truth with humility. Number 8. Myanmar. Let's take a closer look at Myanmar, a country once filled with hope, but now facing one of its darkest chapters. Since the military coup in 2021, the nation has been caught in a relentless storm of violence, economic collapse, and deepening despair. The coup didn't just change the government, it shattered the trust of the people, sparking a brutal civil war that continues to tear the country apart. Resistance groups have risen in many regions, determined to fight back against the military regime. But this resistance comes at a heavy cost. Homes destroyed, lives lost, and communities displaced. If you're watching this and wondering how a nation can reach such a critical breaking point, ask yourself, what happens when power is seized without the will of the people? As the conflict rages on, Myanmar's economy is falling apart, piece by piece. Major businesses have pulled out, foreign investment has dried up, and international sanctions have made it nearly impossible for the country to recover. The local currency has plummeted in value, making everyday goods far too expensive for the average family. Inflation has taken over like a wildfire, and for many, even basic food is no longer affordable. Can you imagine waking up one morning and realizing your money is worth almost nothing, while your family still needs to eat? That's the daily reality for millions of people in Myanmar right now. And it's not just about economics. This is a human tragedy. International aid groups are sounding the alarm that millions are now at risk of starvation. Markets are nearly empty, food prices are climbing beyond reason, and the black market is becoming the only option for many just trying to survive. People are doing whatever they can to get by, but the struggle is immense. Banks are closing, savings are vanishing, and desperation is rising across the country. It's heartbreaking to witness a nation once full of vibrant culture and history, now hanging by a thread, gasping for stability, safety, and hope. Meanwhile, the political situation remains frozen in place. The military refuses to give up power, and rebel forces continue to gain territory in rural areas. The cities are tense and heavily controlled, while the countryside is erupting into a battlefield. The more the military tries to hold on, the more resistance grows. It's a dangerous cycle, and without a peaceful resolution, Myanmar risks falling into complete collapse. Experts say that if things continue as they are, the government may lose control entirely and the country could slip into a state of anarchy. But what would that look like for the people? How long can they endure this suffering without change? This situation invites a moment of reflection for all of us. What does it mean for a country when its leadership no longer serves its people, when fear replaces freedom, and when survival becomes more important than living with dignity? The lesson from Myanmar is not just about politics or economics. It's about the importance of unity, compassion, and the will of the people. A nation is more than its government. It is its people, their dreams, their voices. When those are silenced, the country loses its heart. So, if you're listening to this now, consider, how can we as individuals, no matter where we are, support peace, justice, and human dignity? Myanmar's story is still being written, and though it faces great suffering today, there is always the potential for healing and rebuilding if the people are empowered and the world pays attention. Let this be a reminder that in every nation, the true strength lies not in those who rule, but in the spirit of those who rise for what's right. Number 9. Pakistan. Let's take a closer look at Pakistan, number 9 on our list, and the many challenges it's currently facing, challenges that have left millions of people wondering what tomorrow might bring. Imagine living in a country where the cost of everyday essentials rises faster than your income, where your national currency loses value so quickly that the money in your pocket is worth less each day. This is the reality for many people in Pakistan right now. The country is caught in a dangerous mix of rising inflation, a free-falling currency, and a crushing mountain of foreign debt that now stands at around $125 billion. And with the Pakistani rupee hitting historic lows in early 2025, repaying that debt has become even more difficult. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, how would a nation continue to function under this kind of pressure? The economic challenges alone would be enough to shake any country. But for Pakistan, that's just one part of a much bigger problem. Severe fuel shortages and strict import restrictions have made basic goods like food, medicine, and fuel incredibly expensive and hard to find. That's not just inconvenient, it's life-threatening for many families already living on the edge. At the same time, the country's foreign exchange reserves are dwindling, making it harder and harder to afford imports or stabilize the economy. Can a nation survive without the ability to provide for its people? It's a question many citizens are asking as they try to make sense of daily life that feels increasingly out of control. But the trouble doesn't stop with the economy. Political instability has gripped Pakistan for years, with corruption scandals, military interference in civilian matters, and violent protests becoming almost routine. These political struggles have left the government weak and the people distrustful. When leadership is fragile and trust in institutions breaks down, how can real solutions ever take root? And if that weren't enough, security threats from extremist groups and terrorist organizations continue to escalate, putting pressure not only on the military and police, but on the everyday person trying to live a peaceful life. The impact of all this can be seen in the very systems people depend on: electricity, clean water, public health and education. Power outages are common. Water shortages leave entire communities without access to clean drinking water, and the overall collapse of public services has made daily survival incredibly difficult for millions. Imagine trying to raise a family or build a future in a place where even basic infrastructure can't be counted on. With more than 40% of the population living below the poverty line, many are finding it harder every day to hold on to hope. Even with emergency loans and temporary financial relief from organizations like the International Monetary Fund, many experts argue that these measures are only delaying the inevitable. So here's the deeper question we must ask. What kind of transformation is truly needed to pull Pakistan back from the edge? Is it just about money, or is it about rebuilding trust, leadership, and long-term vision? When a nation's problems are this complex, can short-term fixes ever be enough? As we reflect on Pakistan's situation, it's clear that the challenges are immense. But within every crisis lies the possibility for change. The question is whether that change will come from within, through bold leadership and collective action, or whether outside forces will eventually push the country to a breaking point. What do you think is the path forward for a country like Pakistan? One filled with potential, rich in culture, yet burdened by so many trials. Let's keep this conversation going, because understanding what's happening isn't just about headlines, it's about human lives and the future of a nation still fighting for stability. Number 10. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, a nation once known for its scenic beauty and vibrant culture, is now navigating one of the toughest periods in its modern history, facing a crisis that extends beyond just numbers and into the very soul of its society. Since defaulting on its $83 billion debt in 2022, the country has found itself caught in a downward spiral, with inflation soaring and essential resources like fuel becoming increasingly scarce. This is not just about economics, it's about everyday people struggling to survive. Over a quarter of the population lives below the poverty line, and when families can't afford food, medicine, or fuel to keep warm or get to work, the pain is not only physical, but deeply emotional. Despite the government's ongoing efforts to secure international bailouts, real stability feels out of reach. The tourism sector, once a strong pillar of the economy, has collapsed under the weight of political unrest and safety concerns. Businesses, both small and large, have shut their doors, and foreign investors are staying away, unwilling to risk their capital in such uncertain waters. This creates a ripple effect. When jobs vanish and income disappears, people lose hope, and a society without hope is vulnerable to unrest. The heart of the issue lies not only in debt and economics, but also in leadership. Widespread political corruption and poor governance have eroded public trust. Citizens, feeling ignored and betrayed, have taken to the streets to demand change. These protests are not just about policies, they're about survival, dignity, and a plea to be heard. Violent clashes have erupted, and while some international aid has trickled in to offer temporary relief, it's like putting a bandage on a deep wound. Structural reforms are desperately needed, but without courageous, ethical leadership, these changes will remain just promises on paper. This isn't just Sri Lanka's crisis. It's a reflection of what can happen when a nation's systems prioritize short-term gains over long-term stability, and when the needs of the people are drowned out by the noise of political games. For those of us watching from afar, this story is a sobering reminder of how quickly things can change. Economic collapse doesn't happen overnight. It builds over time through mismanagement, neglect, and the erosion of moral responsibility. In our own lives, whether we are business owners, employees, or simply trying to take care of our families, this teaches us the importance of mindfulness in how we manage our resources and how we hold those in power accountable. When we ignore warning signs or allow our lives to be driven by greed, unsustainable habits, or blind trust, the results can be devastating. So, as we reflect on Sri Lanka's struggle, let it stir within us a deeper awareness of the fragile balance between progress and ethics. Let it also encourage us to support those in need, not only through aid but through compassion, dialogue, and efforts to build fairer, more resilient communities. Every nation, like every individual, has its breaking point, but with wisdom, responsibility, and unity, collapse can become transformation. As we've seen today, the collapse of a nation doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a slow unraveling of trust, stability, and compassion. From Yemen to Sri Lanka, these stories remind us that no country is immune to crisis when leadership fails and people are forgotten. But within every collapse lies a lesson, a wake-up call for us to act with greater awareness, responsibility, and empathy in our own lives and communities. The wisdom we share here at the Journey of Wisdom isn't just about headlines, it's about humanity. If this video gave you something to think about, please like, share it with others, and subscribe to the Journey of Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chance to grow with us through the stories that matter most. Until next time, stay mindful, stay compassionate, and keep walking the path of wisdom.